All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. It is Wednesday, halfway through the week. Always am happy when it's a Wednesday. I don't know why. For some reason, it sort of feels like I've kind of gotten halfway there, halfway up the mountain, halfway to the destination. It kind of has a little bit of a, feeling of success, I don't know what the right word is, accomplishment, which is weird because it's just time. It's just time. But yes, we are at Wednesday hump day. 240-242-5646. Please join me. I would love to talk to you about the politics of the day. And we're going to start with my choice for president, Dr. Jill Stein. I saw her last Thursday, and I played a clip from her talk with Max Blumenthal, where she addressed the Gaza atrocities that Israel is perpetuating, the genocidal acts. So I'm going to try to say genocidal acts, which is what I believe the International Court of Justice is calling them, rather than just saying they're committing genocide. They're committing genocidal acts that look like genocidal in nature, whether it's starving the people of Gaza, whether it's dropping these enormous bombs on densely populated areas, whether it's domicide, which is where you destroy homes. All of that adds up to genocidal acts. That's what they are. And whether there's an intent, an actual intent to eliminate the people of Palestine completely as a group, can be inferred from the actions, but maybe we can't quite conclude that yet. So I'm okay with that. I'll get to Palestine and Israel in a little bit, but let's start with, and they're related topics, by the way, what I'm going to focus on a little bit more, at least to start the program, and that would be, I'll show you. This is how I promoted it. Stein, you can see her there. She is Dr. Stein, and that is from the video. I did not do the video. Maybe if I had, you'd have a better image. I don't know. That's easy for me to say, but maybe it's even true. There's Dr. Stein, and we'll play clips where she talks about COVID and ID politics. I think the identity politics, to my way of thinking, her comments are actually a little more interesting than what she had to say about COVID and healthcare, but this is in chron order. And actually, she's responding to me. We actually had a little bit of a dialogue, question and answer, Q&A, and I was fortunate enough to get called on. I actually thank Max Blumenthal for kind of saying, there's my man over there. I want to get to him. So Max, thanks if you're watching, which maybe you are. Thanks for making sure I got to get my question, and I really do appreciate that. So play that video for you in just a sec. Also, again, don't forget, click like, click subscribe. That is really key, obviously, for me. I want to know that you're out there. And I haven't been getting a ton of calls. I did get from John yesterday, which I really appreciated. But I did speak to a good friend of mine yesterday who told me he appreciated the program, and he'd obviously watched it. And of course, that was very meaningful for me. Whenever I hear from people that they got something out of what I'm doing. Yeah, it touches me. So, keep it coming. Keep the kind words coming if you can. I love them. Okay, let's get to Dr. Stein. And unfortunately, I mentioned, you can see from the video, it's not perfect in terms of the image quality. And sadly, that's also the case with the audio, especially with the audio of my question. For Dr. Stein, I think you can understand clearly what she's saying. With me, it's a little tougher. I'll see if I can possibly boost it, right, while we're listening. Or if I can't, I won't boost it so much as actually boost it, by actually explaining what I'm saying if it's hard to understand. So let's go to the video here. Always a little delay there because start with it. just dead, but here we go.
Go. Two quick questions. One that just came from the discussion on COVID. Yeah. Isn't a lot of the skepticism a direct result of our for-profit healthcare system?
All right, so I don't know if you can hear me clearly. I was speaking quickly. I said I was going to take two questions. She had been talking about how people are very skeptical about, and she's a doctor, and I think she was making the point that she does trust, in large part, the vaccines, that they are helpful, but she understands that there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of people don't. And so my question was, doesn't a lot of that skepticism come from,
these corporations make billions of dollars from a disease that they may have created that caused.
So again, the skepticism comes from the fact that the vaccines come from corporations that may well have been responsible for creating the vaccine itself. So they made us sick. They killed, possibly, we don't know, but the lab leak hypothesis has become more and more, the understood explanation. There's more and more confidence, I think, in the scientific community that what happened was a leak, a lab leak, a lab that was being operated by and for pharmaceutical companies. The U.S. government was very involved in funding it. The research was designed to come up with, presumably, research at that lab come up with vaccines and cures for viruses that are zoonotic in nature. And it now seems likely, much more likely than not, that it was not a bat that bit somebody and caused that person to become sick with COVID, but it was in fact, or some other disease, like some other animal, like a pangolin or something, that was in that wet market in Wuhan, but rather the laboratory itself that was the source of the virus that had been subject, taken out of an animal, subject to some types of change by human researchers, perhaps including gain of function, meaning that it was more contagious and could be spread from human to human, as was the case, as happened. So I'm saying, doesn't this explain why so many people are so skeptical of the value of these vaccines? Because after all, it may well be the case that the pharmaceutical companies, whether wittingly or not, created the very problem which is rewarding them and their shareholders to the tune of billions of dollars. So let's see what Dr. Stein has to say.
Many millions of deaths. I think that answers itself.
And even before we got to COVID, we have a predatory industry which places profit above people. So people come to this discussion, just very alarmed and alerted. So people are not in a trusting mood whatsoever, which is why the solution here is not only crafting proper policies and having public input on that, but it's also about getting the money out of politics and closing the revolving door to our regulatory institutions from industry.
The other question, real quick, is...
All right, so let me stop it there, and then I'll get to the next question, which was about identity politics. But I think this is, to be honest with you, it really shows you how messed up our politics are. That such a common sense answer, such an obvious solution as getting the money out of big pharma's, ability, taking away their ability to propagandize us, taking away the extraordinary profits that they're able to garner, and their ability to profit from our sicknesses, making sure that they get reasonable return on investment, but not to the tune, again, of billions of dollars. And having a not-for-profit healthcare system, this is just common sense. This does not require some kind of advanced degree to understand. And indeed, most people do understand it. And yet our political system is such that the only candidate who is talking about this, well, I guess you could say Marianne Williamson. She is for not, I want to be totally fair. So yes, Marianne Williamson is also a Medicare for All advocate, but she's polling in the, I don't know that what did she get? Like 1%? She got a tiny percentage of the vote, even in New Hampshire. And deservedly so. She's not somebody that deserves your support because of her pro-war stances and because she is ultimately an any blue will do Democrat. But even there, the less bad Democrat, Williamson, gets no support or virtually none in the Democratic primary because of the fear of Trump, right? I mean, that's the basic reason, the fear of Trump. And she has no real history. She's no real record. But it's a tribute to the broken nature of our political system that the candidate who really does speak truth, and very credibly so, very persuasively, is a fringe candidate in a party that isn't even on the ballot in every state. That's how screwed up our political system is. That's how much power the corporations have. And I say to those of you who recognize that we need Medicare for all, and I think that's the majority of Americans, vote for Dr. Stein. It's time for a change. One definition of insanity, by the way, I don't believe this is the correct definition, but people say, oh, you're insane if you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. Well, we've been voting for Republicans and Democrats, for 150 years or so. And there were some good Democrats. It was to our bet. We benefited from having FDR president. We benefited when LBJ was president in many ways. I understand the Vietnam War was a disaster. And I don't want to get into it right now, but I believe that he is unfairly blamed for our deep involvement in Vietnam. I think there were a lot of factors, and I give LBJ largely a pass because I believe, and I think with reason, that he saw his options as either escalate in Vietnam and not get civil rights legislation passed, or push for civil rights legislation at the price of giving the hawks, the Democratic hawks, the Scoop Jacksons, a lot more influence over foreign policy. I mean, we can argue whether that was the right call, but civil rights, that was, I don't know how you can have a decent society, a civilized society, without civil rights. And we didn't have them. And African Americans were not protected under the law in most of this country till the mid-90s. When I say most, it wasn't just the South. Many states in the Midwest, there were covenants, there were a variety of different ways that African Americans were legally, blacks were legally oppressed in this country. And I think LBJ recognized that was evil, that was wrong. He also recognized Vietnam was wrong. He made a choice to address the domestic evil. I will not fault him for that. If you want to join me, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. Insanity is not doing the same thing over and over and thinking you'll get a different result. Insanity is hearing things that aren't there, is seeing things that aren't there. That's what's insane. That's where you're, where you, and it's not even believing something you read that isn't true. It's where you actually legitimately believe there are helicopter people talking to you. That's being crazy. Is when you're so paranoid, you really, really believe, like Hitler really believed all these Jewish people were out there conspiring against him. I guess he did believe it. He was crazy. That's crazy. That's insane. Voting for Republicans and Democrats because you think you have no other choice, I don't think that's crazy. but I think it's very, very self-destructive. And we've seen, at least since LBJ, and with a arguable exception of Jimmy Carter, and certainly he did bring peace to the Middle East, and I give him mucho props for that. He did put the solar panels on the roof of the White House. I give him mucho props for that. So, Jimmy Carter was a pretty decent president in a lot of ways. But basically, by and large, we've been voting for Democrats and Republicans since 1968, and things have gotten steadily worse in this country, and many, many very, very important. So it's time, isn't it, for a change? And I urge you very, very sincerely to vote for Dr. Stein. I don't see an alternative. I thought the alternative was Dr. West, but he's made some very serious missteps, and so now we've got Jill Stein. Let's get on to the topic of identity politics. As you know, if you've been watching me or you've read my blog, my various posts online, they're pretty much all at helginsberg.com. I still have that website. I've been debating whether to keep it up. It does cost me money, and I haven't posted anything there maybe in years or close to it. But, in the end, I like having it. I like having that repository. I think I'm going to have to start taking advantage of it. Even though I know right now personal websites, individual websites are largely deprecated. People do live streams like I do. People post on social media. People have maybe a Medium account or the like. I like having my own website, even still with all those caveats. So for now, I'm going to probably keep it, halginsberg.com. If you get a chance, you can read what I posted in the past. And again, I have issues with a lot of identity politics. I'm going to give you an example later in the program where I think it makes sense, where it's not all wrong. And a lot of identity politics proponents get a lot right, but I think it's often less right than it is wrong. Let's hear what Dr. Stein has to say, and I'll explain my question as if you have trouble hearing it or if I have trouble hearing it.
That is, for the Green Party to succeed, I believe, and I wanted to build a multi-ethnic, multi-racial coalition of poor, struggling, working, and middle class, not upper middle class, not bourgeois, not managerial class, but true working class Americans. All
right, so the question, I had a relatively long preface there, which is, it seems to me what we need to do, Dr. Stein, is build a multi-racial, multi-ethnic coalition of poor, struggling, working, and middle class Americans. And you could see the whole time I'm saying that, she's nodding. She's this is kind of organizing 101. This is progressive politics 101. That's kind of the grail, right? The holy grail. Let's get all these black and white and yellow and brown people together, and let's all fight together for better conditions for all of us. That's kind of the grail. And of course, Dr. Stein, she's a good lefty. She's a good lefty. She gets it. She's not going to disagree with that. I mean, it's a pretty self-obvious, pretty self-evident. So, we see it the same way. And so I'm going to go from there. I'm going to segue in just a sec to why, identity politics, in certain ways, certain types of language, certain tendentious language is problematic. Before we do that, let's subscribe if you haven't. Click to subscribe. Bottom right of your screen, you can see the oval Halitics there on the bottom right, and underneath that, there's a little white and blue square. Same colors, kind of my favorite colors. Yeah, I like white and blue. Not because they're the colors of the Israeli flag. I actually have the Palestinian flag is now my background, right? Is now my is what I'm using on Facebook for my page because of my support. Okay, let's get back to Stein and the question again: what about a multiracial, multi-ethnic inter-class coalition.
You do that if you promote ideas, social constructs like white supremacy, white privilege. Does that not alienate tens of millions, if not 100 million, working class Americans who have seen their status steadily decline, their quality of life steadily decline over the past 50 years?
Great.
So you probably could hear that, but if you didn't, if you had trouble understanding it, do terms like white supremacy alienate the white working class who needs to be part of that coalition? It's the largest component of that coalition that we need to build if we're going to bring about true progressive change in America. And let's hear what Dr. Stein has.
What I hear you saying is, does using terms like white supremacy lock people out, sort of poor white people or white middle class with declining status? I think the discussion has to be nuanced. Discussion needs to be nuanced, and it has to be, a multiracial, multi-ethnic discussion from the get-go. When Ajamu Baraka and I ran for, president in 2016, we had just really good relations across the board, certainly with the communities of color. How to crack the nut with labor is, because we just saw, was it the UAW now that just came out and endorsed Biden? I'm sorry to say. Yeah, so, there are fractures out there in the community, and it requires a really nuanced community building approach to deal with. And thank you for raising the issue. The more of us involved in this process, the better, so I encourage you to sign up and take part.
She sort of made a mistake there because I think she wanted to move on. I don't think she was totally comfortable with that question, and I understand it. I understand why. I get why that question would make you uncomfortable, because if you're in the Green Party, you really want to attract African American leaders. You want to attract elites from groups, identity politics groups, not just Latin America, by the way, Latinx. And I use the term that they use because I know Latino is greatly preferred by the vast majority of Hispanic Americans, 95%, some very extraordinarily high number of Hispanic Americans prefer the term Latino to Latinx, Latina to Latinx. But the actual leaders of the progressive groups in those communities, they like the term Latinx. So it's very tough if you're a Green Party, organizer, you're a Green Party politician. You want to keep on your side the leadership of these groups, even if the rank and file or the people they supposedly purportedly represent don't agree with them, don't share their values when it comes to language, for example. And I think it's the exact same thing when we look at terms like white supremacy. We're seeing a significant move among black voters, especially male black voters, towards Trump. And they don't care about language in, tropes or constructs like white supremacy. They care about jobs. They care about health care. But if you want the leaders in those communities, or at least a subset of the leaders, to be with you, then you do have to, I don't want to say pay lip service, but you have to be much more sensitive to their use of language. And so it's hard for Stein to just simply say, yeah, Ginsburg, you're making a good point. We should probably be careful not to use language. Clearly is inaccurate, right? Because so many whites are not supreme in our society, but also language that drives away people we really, who we believe would otherwise be very responsive to our message.
Maryland Greens are very much interested.
So she made a mistake there because she wanted to move on, but she kind of opened herself up to my follow-up, which was when she said, or she opened herself up when she said, well, you should get involved in your local group. And that allowed me to talk about the Maryland Greens, who are, I think pretty much all in on the identity politics model.
Identity politics.
I call that slice and dice, by the way, where you try to appeal to lots of different marginalized communities with messages that are tailored to that community, rather than an overarching economic class-based analysis, which is what I believe much more effective and much more likely to succeed.
And I believe these terms from my question, if I gleaned it, are divisive and also inaccurate because so many poor whites, so many working class whites are again.
Absolutely, yes. I'm not a fan of identity politics myself. I mean, there's a point to be made because diversity is really important, but identity politics can be extremely divisive. I think class politics is kind of where the money is.
All right, so I loved how she finished with that, and then she did move on, and that's my candidate. And to those who say, well, she's not going to win, if you vote for her, you're saying you don't really care who wins. And my answer is, among the duopoly candidates, that's right. I don't really care who wins. I don't see, and we talked about this yesterday with John, there isn't a significant enough difference in terms of quality between Trump and Biden, and they're going to be the, barring something that could happen. I mean, they're both older. One could die. They both could get sick. Trump could go to jail. I mean, these could happen, but barring something unexpected, they're going to be the two candidates, and I just don't really care between the two of them. I don't have enough of a preference in terms of one being worse or one being slightly less bad than the other. They're both bad. They're both very, very bad. All right, let's, I want to get to, and I mentioned the identity politics. I want to get to this column because I had a bit of a falling out. And I don't know if any of my Green Party Maryland friends are watching or listening, but if they are, I hope they call in 240-242-5646. I had a bit of a falling out because I urged them not to use the term white supremacy. And this came about on the ground that it is very off-putting to white working class who aren't supreme, and also because it's not an accurate description in my view. Certainly it doesn't accurately describe the current political dynamic. I think the current political dynamic is one of wealth supremacy, of inherited wealth and corporate wealth supremacy. And to me, that's what we should be focusing on. And I think that's not a particularly, controversial or shocking or strange view. I think it's just the way it is. So that's where I come down. And I did, and this was in specific to this article that was, I believe, reprinted in the Baltimore Sun by a writer named Davon Love. I don't know if I have his name here, which I'm sorry for. And I went back and I looked closely at it because I reacted at first, and this isn't fair. I don't believe I reacted first it is fair because it's the term itself that I object to, white supremacy. But I didn't read the article closely, and I did do that today, and I probably should have, and I should have spent the time and energy to invite Mr. Love to join me. He makes some points I think are very valid, and I don't disagree with much of what he wrote. I think it's truer about all people than specific, all people who are powerful, all people who are wealthy. Not all, right? Not all, but power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So people with wealth and money, or wealth and they have money. People who have wealth and power, and usually they go together, do treat others badly. I mean, people who are poor treat others badly, but they don't have as much ability to do it. What Love's thesis is that what we see Israel doing now, which is awful and wrong and genocidal, or genocide-like, if not actually genocidal, he views it as white supremacy. And I just don't think that we need to do that. I think we can draw parallels. I don't think it's really instructive to use the term white supremacy. I think it if anything obscures, does not bring us greater clarity. But you can disagree, and if you do, I'd love to hear from you. But I think that, again, we should use terms that are divisive with great care, especially if they divide, and divisive to the point, or divisive in the way that they pit those who should be, in my view, because they have similar interests, economic allies against each other. And that, to me, is the white working class, poor struggling, Black, Latino, and Asians. I think these are natural economic allies. And when we use terms like white supremacy, white privilege, and, we pit natural allies against each other, and we thereby are doing the work carrying water for elites. And so I totally oppose that. But I want to get into some of the specifics of that article, which I think are very interesting. So what Love says here is that he quotes an Aimé Césaire. I don't know who she is, I believe, but she says the Jewish Holocaust is a result of the boomerang effect of European colonialism. And what he says is what Jewish people experienced in World War II is white people doing to other whites what they have been doing for centuries to non-white people. Well, yes, there was a lot of killing by Europeans of non-white people, starting with, if not before, certainly when it came during the Age of Exploration with Columbus, and on, the Age of colonization. Yes, whites killed millions, Europeans killed millions of people in the global South and in North and South America. It's true. There's no argument. And I think a lot of those voices are basically, their voices not only were silenced, but were barely even heard. And it's awful. It's wrong. But it wasn't just during that period of time that Europeans were killing non-whites. They were also killing lots and lots of white people. And it wasn't just the Holocaust. It was throughout this period of endless war in Europe, of kings rampaging against kings. The 30 Years' War saw the population of Germany cut somewhere between a third and a half by many estimates. Those were all white people. You just had armies moving up and down, spreading disease, raping, pillaging, killing, all over Germany for 30 years. And why? For what reason? It was because some of the armies had Catholic kings and princes, and some had Protestant kings and princes. They just didn't agree on religion. That was a major part, wasn't all of it. And greed, of course, and desire for land. They were all mixed in with that. And desire for glory. But it wasn't, to just sort of paint this as he does, as whites killing non-whites for all that time, is just not accurate. And likewise, the Civil War. That was by far the most deadly war in American history. More Americans died, even up till today, I believe, more Americans died, and most of them were white, during the Civil War. And you can look at the two world wars in the 20th century. The majority of people killed were white in Europe. Now, I know that doesn't diminish the suffering of Indians that, and I'm talking about the subcontinent in Asia, by the English colonialization. It doesn't ignore the deaths of the North American native tribes, where that was, if not intent to decimate and kill and commit a true genocide. And I think there's plenty of evidence that it was a genocide. It was in not only in effect, but in aim. Those happen too. But this is what people do. We kill each other. This is part of being human. So I think the term white supremacy doesn't give you a full understanding. But it's true. It happened. We can't deny it. I don't think the killing of the Jews, and he says during World War II, but what Jewish people experienced during World War II, well, it was really more not during, I mean, it occurred at the same time. The Holocaust was during World War II, but it wasn't part of the war. The war was Germany's war of conquest and Japan's war of conquest. There were terrible atrocities that the country of Japan committed. The rape of Nanjing, or Nanking, however you want to pronounce it. Both, I've heard both. Where I believe, I don't know what, tens of thousands, if not 100,000 Chinese people were raped or killed. There were maybe 6 million Russians who were killed. Right now, the war in Ukraine is white on white violence, killing. So I don't think you get anywhere near a full flavor of world history if you reduce it to simply European colonization, even over the past 500 years. It just isn't an accurate characterization. It's part of it. Now, he writes that if you just bookend, or you just say, well, what happened in the Holocaust is just one more atrocity, one more crime of human against human, I think that's pretty much true. I think he's right. And I also think he's right. I mean, but I also would say it's pretty exceptional. It's pretty much up there. There aren't a lot of Holocausts out there, but it's not the only one. I think it's pretty exceptional. You don't have other situations where people were actually, and I've talked about this, were actually loaded onto trains and then pushed into gas chambers. I mean, that really only happened once, as far as I'm aware. It's not the only way you can kill somebody. It's not the only kind of atrocity. It's not the only kind of mass murder by any means. But it still makes it a pretty exceptional event. So I think calling it white supremacy as this is the, this is a way to characterize oppression, I don't think that doesn't fully characterize, doesn't describe it. And the term itself is so loaded because you're saying, okay, whites are just simply lording it over everybody else. But again, that's just not accurate. I mean, you go back 100 years ago. This is a factory in the United States, a mill, 1900. Those are white children that are, standing on some kind of hellish contraption to make shirts or some kind of fabric. I mean, their voices, we talk about child labor, but the voices of the children are largely silenced. Now, I will say, I'm going to add this because I hate terms like white privilege and white supremacy, but we at least have this picture. I was looking for images from 120 years ago, 115 years ago, 160 years ago when we had child labor in this country of African-American children. And I didn't really find any. And it sure as hell wasn't because they weren't black kids working in terrible conditions and, out in fields. And, this isn't a factory, but believe picking cotton and stuff is horrible too. I mean, these are just, incredibly inhumane the way we treated children. At least these children, their pictures, their faces were seen by Americans in newspapers and magazines, and ultimately this put an end to child labor. Black faces weren't even seen. So yes, that's a distinction. That's wrong. But the solution is still the same. If you guarantee all children have enough to eat, that families can take care of their themselves and their kids, that jobs pay a decent wage for everybody, then you solve this problem. You don't have kids working in mills anymore, regardless of their color. But it is a fair point. It certainly is to say, well, we see the white face, not the black. I get that. But in the end, these children were exploited too. In the end, these children were victims too. In the end, these children were not supreme in any way either. And I think we make a terrible mistake politically if we don't view them as victims just as much, or almost, as victims also. Let's just say as victims also. 240-242-5646. Look, I want to win. I want to win elections. I want to change the government. I want everyone to have enough and no one to have too much. And I don't think when we use terms like, or we use expressions like Zionism is white supremacy, we're getting closer to that goal. I think we make it harder to achieve that critical goal, that imperative, that moral imperative. And trust me, I think what Israel is doing is so evil. I don't think we need to call it white supremacy, though, to consider it evil. I think we can just consider it evil because it's just killing people. Because it's one after another genocidal act for zero military reason whatsoever. In fact, it's counterproductive when it comes to the safety of the Israelis as well. But I don't think this is the way to address it if you want to win. If you want to stop it. I don't think this is the way to do it. So I want to show you some, this came from let me just show you this. When I saw this video, I was just so upset. I've been getting into an argument. I said toxic Zionism, right, is one of the topics. And I've seen people on Facebook who are just simply unwilling to even criticize Israel in the most minuscule way. If you bring up the atrocities that Israel commits, it's always, yeah, but what about Hamas? And Israel's under attack. Israel is not under attack. Israel suffered a terrorist attack on October 7th. It is not under attack now. Israelis are not under imminent threat of death from Hamas now. But Palestinians, Gazans, most certainly are. This video just, I don't know where you go if you see this and you're not just absolutely horrified, if you're not just determined that we need to go in a different direction. I will just, I won't even show myself. Let me just, this is from, and who knows, I guess you could argue it's faked or something. I'm certain it isn't. So this is a Palestinian father recorded holding his dead daughter. And I mean, you know, sentiment takes you places. Emotion takes you places. This is what we're supporting. This is what the U.S. government is backing. We can't keep doing this. You cannot. That's why you can't vote for Joe Biden. It's not acceptable. This is what we're supporting.
تعوض الله يا حاج تعوض تفضل يا عم تعوض يا حبيبي بإذن الله يا رب روح الروح هذه روح الروح لا حول ولا قوة هذه روح الروح الله وين طارق
So, I mean, where do you go with that? Except we have to go in a different direction. We can't keep voting for presidents who are funding that. And you don't have to call it white supremacy to just call it evil. And that's what, and the toxic Zionism comes in with, well, you see a video like that and you're like, yeah, but what about the victims of Hamas? They suffered the same way. And I don't disagree. I don't deny it. But we're not funding Hamas. And Israel is not a client state. It is not a open air, basically concentration camp. Palestine is the victim. It is the oppressed area. It is the oppressed peoples. That doesn't make it okay what Hamas did, but it does make it more understandable. And it makes Israel in part responsible. Because when you oppress people and you persecute them and you mistreat them for years and for decades, they're going to hate you. And some of them are going to start killing you. I wanted to get just a little bit more from what Davon Love said in that article about Zionism as white supremacy. Because, again, I think there's value in it. I'm not saying there isn't. I think from a political perspective, it's very problematic to use the term white supremacy because it pits people against each other who should be allies. But I would be okay with it. I would say, okay, well, it's true. It pits erstwhile allies against each other, but it's accurate. And in the end, the truth is what matters more than anything else. A lot of what Dr. King had to say pissed off a lot of white people, a lot of working class white people who maybe it would have been really good, or it would have been, not maybe, it would have been great if they had joined the civil rights movement, and instead they didn't. But you got to tell the truth. So if the message of white supremacy were accurate, I would say, okay. But it's not. It just isn't. You see too many white people sleeping under bridges and rattling cans trying to get a little money for themselves and going bankrupt because they don't have the money to pay for a procedure. Now, all of that doesn't mean there aren't more per capita people of color who are going through the same thing. They are. But these are the victims of largely unchecked, rapacious capitalism that doesn't always or often doesn't see color. So where I disagree, large-scale violence against white people in a white supremacist society is deemed exceptional. So, I don't know. I mean, we've seen many, many, many millions of whites killing other whites in what I guess he would call a white supremacist society. So I'd hardly say we deem it exceptional. I think what it is, though, fair to say, I think his point that when white people kill people of color, we don't talk about it as much. I think there's truth to that. I think that's fair. But I think a lot of people are making up for that omission or doing their best. The 1619 Project was certainly an attempt to right the scales. I think that went probably right at the scale, went, I won't say it went too far in the other direction, but just mischaracterized a lot of American history and misrepresented it. But I think it's true, yes. When non-white people are victims, we tend not to hear as much about it. I think that's fair. I also would agree with this. I agree that, I don't want to say white people do often claim victim status. I've heard Christians talk about how they were fed to the lions. And yeah, maybe you were 1,800 years ago, but what does that have to do with today? What does that have to do with the current world situation? It really has nothing to do with it. I'm not saying the Holocaust is irrelevant to today's world. It is not irrelevant. There are still survivors. There are still people who knew those who were put in the ovens and machine gunned to death. That's still today in people's minds and memories. But in the end, whatever was done to Jews 80 years ago doesn't make it okay for them to kill Palestinians today. In fact, whatever was done to Jews by Hamas 4 months ago doesn't make it okay to kill Palestinians today. But I agree. People do, and this is where I have a problem, even the term, while I agree with Love, that people do, groups of people, individuals, say, well, I'm a victim, so I get to lash out at you. I get to make you a victim too. And that's terrible and it's wrong. I don't think that's a white thing. I think that's just a human thing. And you do see it in the African American community. You see when people talk about high rates of violence in the African American community, then some will argue, well, and not that they're wrong. They're not necessarily wrong at all. Well, our society doesn't value black lives to the degree that it values other people's lives. And I think African American people value African American lives more than probably they value white lives. And obviously the converse is true. But isn't that still an excuse? Aren't you still saying, well, our society is more violent because, or at least when it comes to street crime, our society is more violent because of what white people have done. So you're sort of absolving yourself, right? I'm not saying it's incorrect, but this is what people do. This is what humans do. We try to make ourselves not only the victims, but also justified when we victimize others. So, this is useful, but my belief is you really want to persuade people. You want people to join your side. You don't point fingers at others. You say, this is what I can do better. This is how I can make things better. This is how, and I'm not clear. If you want to say, well, my community needs healthcare, fine, let's talk about that. How do we get it to you? How do we work together to get everyone healthcare? I'm not seeing that article on white supremacy doing that, providing the solutions, provides a construct that has some value, but ultimately I think is misleading and counterproductive. So I don't support it. I don't like identity politics. I was talking to a friend of mine who, as I mentioned earlier, had praised my live stream, had praised Halitics, and I was very pleased, very touched. And I said, I bragged. I said, I don't fall for all the ways that the elites try to pit us against each other. I'm focused on building community of poor, struggling, and working people. I'll call out when I see divisive tactics being used, or why I think we shouldn't use this particular argument or this language because it makes it harder for us to join together. But I don't fall for it. I was, boasting. And this guy says to me, well, I think you do. I think you do. And I said, well, give me an example. He said, some of the stuff you've said about trans people is not really true. And it is divisive because the trans community is often victims and we need them to be part of our coalition, and they should be. And so I was like, well, give me some examples. And he pointed out, he said, you've gone on and you've complained about trans women athletes dominating. And they don't. It's just not the reality. Yes, Leah Thomas, the Penn swimmer who transitioned from the men's team to the women's team, did have a really good day and win a lot of races, but in the end, her times weren't even that extraordinary. And I don't believe, he said, I don't believe, and I think he's absolutely right, she broke any records. Just some Ivy League records, but not any collegiate records. So bio or natal women are faster in the pool. The fastest natal women are faster than Leah Thomas, a trans woman, was at her fastest. Well, that's important data, right? Now, I still maintain that there should be bio women or natal women only spaces. I don't think in college and high school girls and college women who were born women should be competing against people who were born male. I don't think that's correct. But the argument that they'll lose doesn't really hold that much water. And I think it's important that we understand that. And I shouldn't use that trope of these dominant, strapping, male-like women dominating in sports because it's just not accurate. Serena Williams is a bio woman. She is the most dominant woman tennis player ever. She's a biological woman. Without any, it's clear. The greatest swimmer, female swimmer of all time, Katie Ledecky, is a woman. So there, it doesn't, the evidence isn't clear by any means that if you are a trans woman, you have some sort of major advantage over the top women athletes. But I still think, given the appearance differences, I just think it's not a good look. And I think that trans women should have their own spaces to compete. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's evidence of my transphobia. But as my friend pointed out to me on the phone, regardless of what you think about an issue that really impacts a very small number of people, the trans community is in many, many ways marginalized. Members of the trans community are victimized, and they need our help. And you're not helping them when you start talking about trans women athletes. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. I was wrong there. And this is I don't have to rectify, but I wanted to, in the context of identity politics, talk about a group that is identifiable, by its characteristics as opposed to its class, but identifiable by specific sex characteristics that has very legitimate grievances that I think we need to address in specific, as opposed to what I usually call for, which are sort of broad-based remedies. Remedies that are for everybody. Everyone gets Medicare for all. We have a jobs program in this country and throughout the country where if you seek meaningful, fairly remunerated employment, we are going to do everything possible to find that for you to make sure that there are available good jobs for all. And to the extent there aren't, you will always have enough. Everyone will have enough. And no, I mean, and those are, universal. But I do understand, maybe a little better now, that we also have to recognize that identity groups do have specific needs that may be different than the general population does. And so I wanted to talk about this with respect to the trans community. MoCo 360, which is a local MoCo for Montgomery County, so it's a local, but a county media outlet, which is really valuable and does a great job. I mean, I have to say, I've tried to get Ginny Bixby on with me. I'm sort of, I'm going to give her props because she does a really nice job, but I would love to have her on Halitics, and she hasn't even responded to my emails. So I'm not. But here Ginny Bixby talks about this report just a few days ago. You see 24. MoCo needs to invest in transgender health care resources, new report says. Recommendations include an LGBTQ plus center and more training for medical professionals. And obviously those are sex specific. We're saying doctors, nurses, other, EMTs, healthcare professionals need to be taught specifically about the challenges that, they will face when they are treating the trans community. And I think that's specific. That's not just something you say, well, everyone gets the same. No, they need special, different. Likewise, a center, not, I think centers which are targeted for people who are LGBTQ+. And I don't like that so much because I don't like siloing people or segregating people. But I have said, I think that we need some bio women only spaces, some NATO women only spaces. It seems really clear that to an even greater degree, we probably do need, especially for the trans community, but also, I can understand why people who are sexually different than the, whatever you want to call it, I won't say the norm, but than the majority would really benefit from having their own spaces. So let's have it. I'm good with that. And I did some more research on this. I thought it was very interesting. There was a article. Well, this is more from Jenny. I'm sorry, it's not. I should have. Let me see if I can legible for you. But the report that the Montgomery County came out with really was pretty thorough and goes into pretty significant detail. And I mean, the facts are interesting, but again, I think what my point even more so is, yes, we do need to be mindful. I need to be mindful of the unique challenges that some groups of people, some identities, probably all do to a degree, but today we're talking about the trans community face. So some of the issues, just a difficulty even getting health care. It's not just relating to their nature as a trans person, but also just any treatment because of the economic privations, the difficulties that trans people have getting a job, how many aren't even accepted in their family, so they're no longer living at home, they're not on a family health care plan. This needs to be addressed. This absolutely needs to be addressed. I think it would be much easier to address without any question If everyone in healthcare, if we all had guaranteed single-payer healthcare, then some of these problems would be addressed, like the difficulty that trans people have just getting any care obviously would be addressed. They would get care because they would be covered in a universal healthcare program, right? They would get care just like everyone else. It wouldn't solve all their problem because they need treatment sometimes or specific healthcare that is different than others do, than cis people do. But a lot of their problems would be addressed. And to the extent that they're not, I think there'd be far less pushback. I think a lot of people say, wait, I don't even have healthcare. I don't have insurance from my job. I have to buy from the exchange, or I can't even afford to buy on the exchange. I'm getting fined for it. So why are we spending all this millions of dollars to build some special community center for these people? I don't even have a community center. If we had across the board fairness, if we already had a commitment to guaranteeing everyone enough and nobody too much, I don't think there'd be as much reaction, as much negative. There'd be some, but not as much. It would be much more acceptable, I think. The MoCo 360 piece that Jenny Bixby wrote was very interesting to me because I was also reading a report from Ontario in Canada that trods a lot of the same ground, but to some extent was a little bit different, was not completely the same because in Canada, of course, they have universal single-payer coverage. So it's interesting because some of the issues we're talking about now are totally relevant. Even in a society, and by the way, Canadian care isn't perfect. It's not, I always thought Canada was considered one of the very best. It's not. France, Japan, Germany, they have what are recognized to be more comprehensive, more complete care for their citizens than Canada does. But Canada's clearly better than what we have. So this article from the Ontario HIV Treatment Network talks about the challenges in Canada where there's universal coverage. And again, this was very interesting to me because I always talk about universal solutions, comprehensive solutions, where everyone gets enough. But what we learn in Ontario is even then, it's not always enough. Even in a universal single-payer system like what you have in Canada, there are specific challenges that this community faces. And therefore, we as a society do have a duty, we have an obligation, and certainly Canadians do have an obligation to address those issues. So what Ontario finds, in jurisdictions without universal health care like the United States, trans individuals postpone medical care due to cost, like lots of other people do. And you can see that they make that point. It's a problem for many, but it's particularly acute for trans people because of high unemployment rates and therefore less access to employer-based coverage. And also some of the treatments that they need are not covered by insurance. So, yeah, I mean, this seems pretty obvious. I think the sympathy for the trans community would be greater if Americans in general weren't rightly feeling, understandably feeling like we're all getting screwed by the corporate elite class, by the top management class. Since so many of us feel that way, we're resentful when a group comes forward and says, well, what about me? Give me special treatment. It pisses people off, understandably. But the fact is, this group does need special treatment. I would argue, if I were a trans leader, that the best way to go about this would be to, yes, advocate for your community, but also advocate very loudly for care for all, so that every community, whether it's an inner city black neighborhood, everyone in that neighborhood gets universal single-payer care. Whether it's a predominantly white Appalachian community, everyone there gets universal single-payer health care. If you show yourself to be an ally, a staunch, committed ally to other groups, you will find, I think, some of them will also champion you and what you want for your community. So I do think universalizing these issues is valuable, but that doesn't mean that they're all equally relevant to every community. They're not. So there were some other factors I thought were pretty interesting in this Ontario study, which let me just go through real quick. So others, and this, again, yes, we all should have enough. We all should have medical treatment, but there are specifics to this identity group. Doctors do need, at least if you're going to treat the trans community, you need to be competent in it. There are differences between the care provided, expert care that you provide to a transgender. I mean, it depends, right? I mean, if you're taking out an appendix, it doesn't matter, but in other areas, it really does matter. And I think the bedside manner matters too. Bedside manner matters too. All right, we're just about done. I'm going to close this up in a moment. 240-283-72. No, 240-242. Gosh, why do I do that? 5646. 240-242-5646. Probably your better bet is to call tomorrow if you want to join me and talk to me. I wanted to end with this particular slide. And this goes to something that my friend said to me yesterday, about the pain that people in the trans community are feeling. And that, when you go on about, trans women athletes, their pain is ignored. And you might even be, increasing it. And that doesn't mean you're necessarily wrong, but it doesn't, about that issue. But it does mean that you're not really capturing the experience, of course, that so many face. And this is, very, just like I played the clip of the Palestinian man holding his daughter, and how painful it is to see how our tax money is funding mass murder. It's painful to think about what this community is going, individuals in that community. Lack of support, isolation, without question. I don't see how any of us could doubt that that's going to manifest itself in various ways, physical, physiological, and psychological. High rates of suicide, depression. This is what is common in the trans community. And we do need, as a society, to recognize that this group of people is in pain. They're in pain because of prejudice, phobia, being a minority in among a large majority. That is going to be painful in and of itself. So all of this. So yes, there is a place, without question, for identity politics, for focusing on the needs of my community, of one community, but not at the expense of others, which is, for example, what we see with the Israelis insisting that they're victims. So therefore we get to persecute and even kill those we claim harmed us. That's wrong. That's toxic. That's why we call it toxic Zionism. Demanding that your group get treated fairly, get the the medical attention it needs, that jobs are available for that community. That is completely appropriate and what we should be supporting if we're progressives. All right, that's going to do it for me today. I hope you found this of value, interest, entertainment, perhaps a little bit. And I will be back tomorrow. May have a guest, not certain yet. Thanks for watching Halitics. And don't forget, like and subscribe if you can. And you haven't yet.